Nobody wanted to sell, so prices went up. Well, what's going to happen? All of a sudden, nobody wants to buy anymore. Who wants to buy houses when they're falling in value? Who wants to lend money to buy houses? You see, when real estate prices were rising, the lenders didn't care. Default, who cares about default? If the guy defaults, we'll sell the house and we'll make a profit. But when prices are falling and lenders are worried about defaults, they're going to contract their lending. I'm not going to lend money out. Nothing down. Are you kidding me? You know, I need 20% down. Of course, when you require a down payment, it makes it much more difficult for someone to buy a house, especially when the prices are so high. You know, if the average house is $500,000 and now you need $100,000 down, the average guy doesn't have that money. It was the fact that they abolished the down payment that made so many people able to pay these prices. In fact, there was a whole lending industry constantly lowering their standards and lowering their standards, which enabled prices to rise. Historically, the lenders provided a check on home prices. And if you look at a chart, you go back like 100 years, and you look at the price of houses in the United States until 2000, it matched the CPI. That's basically all that happened is housing prices basically stayed even with the CPI, but only because the owners of those houses spent a bunch of money every year maintaining them. If you didn't maintain it, if you didn't fix the roof, if you didn't fix the pipe, if you didn't do all that stuff, your house lost value. It was only because you kept it current and you maintained it that it kept pace with inflation. It wasn't until 2000 it went off the charts because something weird happened. And this is all going to be corrected. This is all going to be corrected. But also, you know, when pendulums swing, they don't swing way to one side and then come and stop in the middle. They go all the way the other way first. It takes a while before you find a balance. So as expensive as real estate got, right, that's how cheap it's going to get. People are going to be completely amazed at the prices that houses are going to be selling for in a few years. Amazed. Just as amazed as the people were when they saw their shares of stocks go from 200 to nothing, or practically nothing. It's the same thing. It's the same dynamic, because you're going to have lots of sellers, you're going to have very little buyers, you're going to have a lot of foreclosures, you're going to have a lot of developers going bankrupt, you're going to have a lot of speculators. You know, I know lots of people own 5, 6, 7, 8 houses. You know, maybe they've had negative cash flow on these houses. Their negative cash flow is going to get bigger because a lot of them are refinanced with adjustable rate mortgages. You know, I know people who own many, many houses, and when they qualified on their loans, they wrote owner-occupied. I mean, there are people that have 7 or 8 or 9 owner-occupied homes in different states. I mean, everybody is looking the other way at these speculators buying houses. But, you know, they're all going to come on the market. Look where we are here in Las Vegas. I mean, there are so many condominiums that have been built in this town that nobody lives in. Their lights are never on. I mean, they weren't even bought with the intention of living in them. Some of them are so small, it's like nobody would even want to live. Why would you even want to buy a condo in this town? Look at all the hotel rooms. And they're pretty reasonably priced. Why would you want to own a condo? Well, the only reason people wanted to buy condos was because they thought they can flip them to somebody else. But as this huge supply of houses comes back on the market from speculators who got caught, and a lot of people who are speculators are homeowners. Just because you own your home and live in it doesn't mean you're not a speculator. If you bought a house using an adjustable rate mortgage, knowing that you can't afford to make the payments when they reset, you're a speculator. If you bought a house planning on selling it in 2 or 3 or 4 years, you're a speculator. That's all you are. So we had rampant speculation in this housing market, much more so than we had in the stock market. But the bigger problem is how intertwined the economy and the stock market are. Because if you look at that housing wealth, or those housing prices as the source of this consumption and the collateral for all of our borrowing from abroad, this is the problem. Now, of course, when interest rates start to fall, I mean, when prices start to fall, people think, well, the Fed will just cut interest rates and save the day with some rate cuts. It's not going to happen. Once the bubble bursts, cutting interest rates doesn't stop it. Greenspan brought interest rates all the way down to 1%. It didn't stop the NASDAQ decline. It happened anyway. Once money starts moving out of an asset, it moves out of that asset. Low interest rates aren't going to do anything. And the bigger problem, though, is the dollar. Right now, as I said, the dollar, I think, is poised for a substantial decline. Once the dollar really starts to fall, interest rates are going to have to rise, and rise sharply, to shore it up. Because we have no savings. We've got to pay the Europeans and the Asians to hold their savings in our currency. And when our currency starts to fall, the only thing that we can do to entice them to hold it is to pay them higher and higher rates of interest. And in 1980, when Ronald Reagan came in and we tried to stop the decline of the dollar, which lost 2/3 of its value during the 1970s. We did it, but we did it by putting short-term interest rates up to 20%. Now, imagine what would happen in the U.S. economy if interest rates were even half of 20%. What would the interest on the national debt be? Oh, $1 trillion a year. Where the hell is the government going to get that money? Imagine if people's home mortgages were now based on an overnight Fed funds rate of 10%. I mean, could anybody make their payments? Where would this economy be? What would happen to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac? Would they still be around? You know, those tranches that we're shorting, according to the statistics, all it takes is about 5%, a 5% loss rate on these collateralized mortgage obligations. Just 5 cents on the dollar is lost, and it wipes out that tranche completely to zero. I think about a similar amount of losses would wipe out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and of course the government has an implied guarantee of all that debt. And of course, you know, Barry talked about inflation and how inflations have destroyed countries. It's not inflation that destroys countries, it's governments, because governments create inflation. Governments create inflation by creating money. And that's the situation that we're staring at, because as the housing bubble implodes, as the economy implodes, as these entities go bankrupt, like the Pension Guarantee Corp, like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, the incentive to monetize that and for the politicians to print enough money to try to make good these promises is tremendous. It's the same type of incentives that the Argentines faced, that the Germans faced in the Weimar Republic. That's what led to the inflation. And that's something that potentially we're staring at. I hope it doesn't get to that worst-case scenario, but unfortunately, that type of inflation is the only thing that's going to stop nominal real estate prices from collapsing. If we don't have that, if the government does the right thing, we will see real estate prices decline dramatically. Not only will all the gains of the last 6 or 7 years be completely erased, but prices will be lower than they were in 2000. Lower by a considerable margin. And as I said, you know, if it doesn't happen, if we have inflation, it really doesn't matter if you live in a $1 million condo, if you have $10,000 worth of groceries in your refrigerator. Relative prices don't matter, right? And that's what might happen if we just have enough inflation so that nominal housing prices don't collapse. But real housing prices have to go down. And that's real housing prices relative to the price of everything else. Am I out of time? Anyway, thanks.